Sir Walter Pemberton's shout tore through the church before the priest could finish speaking the words of the marriage rite. "Stop this at once," he bellowed, striding toward the altar with his face burning with barely contained fury. "I have just learned who the groom's mother is. My daughter will not marry the son of a chandler." A murmur of shock rippled through the church, packed to its last pew. Edith, standing beside her son Robert with her hands clasped over the plain apron she had insisted on wearing even on so solemn a day, felt the world stop turning around her. "Take her from this place," Sir Walter ordered his servants, pointing at Edith as one points at something unclean to be swept from sight. "And take with her whatever linen she brought, for I will not have anything touched by a chandler's hands inside my daughter's house." Edith did not weep. She did not beg. She simply gathered, with quiet dignity, the small bundle of wedding linen she had woven with her own hands over many months, and pressed to her chest, beneath her apron, a small cloth pouch that no one in the church noticed, where she kept something she had planned to give that very day as the most important wedding gift of the entire ceremony. Robert, shamed before the whole town, took his mother by the arm and led her from the church with his back straight, though something inside him broke forever in that moment. To know how this story ends, how the scorned son of a chandler came to be recognized as heir to far more than the family that shamed him had ever possessed, we must go back 25 years, to the day a young earl sealed with his own hand a secret Edith would keep for a quarter century. Before we continue this story, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We love knowing how far this story has traveled. To understand how we arrived at that church, we must return 25 years, to the day Earl Cedric of Brackenfield, before departing on a campaign from which he would never return, sent secretly for a notary. Edith had known Earl Cedric when both were young, she the daughter of the town's chandler, he heir to one of the oldest noble houses in the shire. What passed between them, brief but sincere, ended when war claimed the Earl and the gulf between their births made any shared future impossible. But before he left, knowing Edith carried his child, Cedric insisted on doing what few men of his station ever did, formally acknowledging the child before a notary, sealing the document with his own wax seal. "I do not know if I shall return from this campaign," Edith he had told her, the last night they saw one another. "But I want my child, should he ever wish it, to be able to claim what by blood is his. Keep this document somewhere safe, and decide, when the time comes, whether it is better for him to know his father or to grow up far from the intrigues that surround my name." Cedric died months later, in a border skirmish scarcely remembered as a battle at all. Edith, pregnant and alone, made a decision then that would cost her 25 years of silence. She would keep the document in the archive of St. Wulfstan's Priory, under the care of a young monk named Brother Oscar, and raise her son as a chandler's son, far from a court she feared might corrupt the honest heart she meant to give him. Robert grew up knowing nothing of his true father, learning the trade of stonemason with the same devotion his mother had brought to the art of candle-making. He was a hard-working, honest young man, beloved by all in town for his quiet temper and readiness to help anyone in need, qualities Edith watched with silent pride, certain she had done right to raise him far from any privilege that might have changed him. When Robert met Joan Pemberton, daughter of the newly wealthy merchant Sir Walter, the love between the two young people seemed, for months, strong enough to overcome any difference in fortune between their families. Sir Walter, anxious to secure the social standing his family had won in barely 2 generations of prosperous trade, had considered the marriage acceptable so long as he believed Robert came from a family of respectable craftsmen, without knowing the exact particulars of his mother's trade. "I never imagined a man's pride could be so fragile," Edith confessed to Brother Oscar, weeks before the wedding, during one of her regular visits to the priory to make certain the document still lay untouched. "Sir Walter is so afraid of losing the little he has gained that I am certain, if he knew the full truth of Robert's origin, everything would change at once." "Do you mean to reveal the secret before the wedding, Edith?" the monk asked, with his usual discretion. "I had thought to give it to Robert as a wedding gift, Brother Oscar." Let him decide, now a married man, whether to claim what is his by blood, or to go on living the honest life we have built together." The wedding day arrived beneath a clear sky over the town, and Edith dressed with the same care she had brought to every important moment of her son's life, carrying with her, hidden beneath her apron, the small pouch with the wax seal she meant to give that very afternoon, after the ceremony, as the true wedding gift she had kept for 25 years. What she did not expect was that, hours before the ceremony, one of Sir Walter's servants, gossip by nature, discovered and reported to his master the exact particulars of Edith's trade, without the least care for the harm those words would cause. "A chandler, you say?" Sir Walter had asked, his face unraveling into barely restrained fury. "My daughter about to marry the son of a common chandler, and no one told me until now?" And so we arrive at the scene already known to us, the brutal interruption in the midst of the wedding rite, the public expulsion of Edith with the wedding linens in her arms, the calculated humiliation before the whole town gathered to witness what should have been the happiest day of Robert's life. If you have ever been judged for where you came from rather than for who you truly are, if another's pride has ever decided your worth without knowing you at all, then you already know something of the pain Edith and Robert carried that afternoon, walking in silence toward the modest workshop where she had made candles for 25 years. But stay with this story a little longer, for the justice that seems impossible is sometimes sealed with wax for a quarter century, waiting only for the right moment to break open. Robert did not know, walking beside his mother with his heart broken by shame, that very night he would learn a truth capable of changing the entire course of his life. Back at the workshop, with the candle fire still burning and the smell of wax filling every corner as always, Edith sat beside her son and, for the first time in 24 years, decided to tell him the whole truth about his father. "My son, there is something I should have told you long ago, and that today, after what has happened, I can no longer keep silent," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Your father was not the humble candle maker you believe. He was Earl Cedric of Brackenfield, and before he died on campaign, he formally acknowledged you as his son before a notary." Robert listened to the whole account with a mixture of astonishment and confusion, unable for a long moment to find the right words to answer. "Why did you never tell me, mother?" he asked at last, without reproach but with genuine curiosity. "Why did you keep this secret for so many years?" "Because I feared your father's court would corrupt you, my son. I wanted you to grow up knowing the value of honest labor, not the weight of a name you never chose. I thought to give you the document today, as a wedding gift, so you could decide for yourself what to do with that inheritance." The following day, mother and son together visited St. Wulfstan's Priory, where Brother Oscar received them with the same warm discretion as always, though with an expression of relief at seeing Edith had finally decided to reveal the truth. "The document is still untouched, Edith, just as we left it 25 years ago," the monk confirmed, showing them the chest where it was kept, sealed with the same seal of Earl Cedric. "I have cared for it with the same devotion with which you raised your son." Robert, holding for the first time the parchment that formally acknowledged his noble origin, felt a mixture of emotions difficult to sort out: pride for the father he had never known, gratitude toward the mother who had sacrificed so much to protect him, and a growing anger toward the family that had shamed him without knowing whom they scorned. "What should I do now, Brother Oscar?" he asked, seeking in the old monk the wisdom he needed in that moment. "That, young Robert, is a decision only you can make. But remember that truth, once known, cannot return to hiding. Sooner or later, the whole town will know who you truly are." Meanwhile, at the Pemberton house, Sir Walter, satisfied at having avoided what he considered a stain on his family's lineage, hastened to arrange a new marriage for Joan with the family of another wealthy merchant from the neighboring shire, unaware of the monumental mistake he had just made. "Do not weep any longer, daughter," he told Joan, who had spent the whole night crying for the man she loved. "We shall find a far better match for you, worthy of our family." Joan, however, did not share her father's pride. She had loved Robert sincerely, never caring for his mother's trade, and the public humiliation her own father had inflicted weighed on her as heavily as the separation itself. "I do not want another match, father," she answered, with a firmness that surprised Sir Walter. "I want Robert, no matter who his mother is." Word that Edith and Robert had repeatedly visited the priory soon reached Sir Walter, who, fearing some manner of revenge or public scandal that might further damage his family's name, decided to present himself before the prior to demand an explanation. "Reverend Father, I have been told that the Chandler and her son have visited the archive with unusual frequency. I wish to know what they are seeking." The prior, a man of firm principles not easily intimidated by the social standing of his visitors, answered calmly but without yielding ground. "The matters the faithful bring to our monks are confidential, Sir Walter, regardless of their standing in this town. If you have any particular concern, I suggest you discuss it directly with the Lady Edith." Frustrated by the refusal, Sir Walter then sought out Brother Oscar directly, applying veiled pressure over the regular donations his family made to the priory. "Brother Oscar, it would be a shame if certain generous families reconsidered their support for this institution, should they discover that its monks keep secrets capable of embarrassing respectable neighbors. Brother Oscar, faithful to the promise made to Edith 25 years before, revealed nothing, though the threat cost him sleepless nights, fearing the consequences his silence might bring upon both himself and the priory." That same night, Edith, sensing that time was growing short and that Sir Walter would not stop searching until he learned the truth by his own means, made a decision she had delayed out of respect for Robert's need to weigh the news at his own pace. "My son, we can wait no longer," she told him, finding him awake in the workshop, unable to sleep himself. "Sir Walter will not stop searching until he discovers the truth in the worst possible way, perhaps twisted or used against us. We must present the document before the bishop ourselves, on our own terms." Robert, who had spent the last days torn between wounded pride and curiosity to know more of the father he had never had, at last nodded with a new determination. "You are right, mother. It is time this town knew the whole truth, not the version Sir Walter decides to tell to protect his own pride." Brother Oscar, informed of Edith's decision, offered to accompany them personally to the bishop, willing to risk whatever reprisals Sir Walter might attempt against the priory in order to see the truth finally acknowledged. "I have kept this secret for 25 years, Edith," he told her, as they prepared the document together for the hearing. "It is time I too find the peace of knowing I did right until the very end." The bishop of the diocese, a man of 60 years whose reputation for impartial justice had been forged over decades of settling disputes among the shire's families, received Edith, Robert, and Brother Oscar in formal audience barely 2 days after their request, struck by the seriousness with which the Chandler presented her case. "Lady Edith, if this document is genuine, it represents a noble acknowledgement of the greatest importance," the bishop said, examining the sealed parchment with care. "Are you prepared for the consequences of making it known?" "I am, Your Grace. I have kept this secret 25 years to protect my son from the intrigues of court, not from shame of the truth. But after what happened in the church, I believe it is time the whole truth was known." The bishop, satisfied by the authenticity of the seal and the testimony of Brother Oscar, summoned a public hearing, expressly inviting Sir Walter Pemberton and his family to witness what was about to be revealed. Sir Walter, appearing before the bishop without knowing exactly what to expect, was startled to see Edith and Robert present, still believing this some manner of formal protest for the public humiliation he himself had ordered. "Your Grace, if these people seek a formal apology, I am willing to consider it, though I maintain my decision to protect my daughter's honor was fully justified." "This is not about apologies, Sir Walter," the bishop answered, with an authority that silenced the merchant at once. "This is about the truth of the young man's origin whom you publicly scorned barely days ago." Brother Oscar then stepped forward, unrolling the parchment before the whole assembled gathering, and began to read aloud the words Earl Cedric of Brackenfield had dictated before a notary 25 years before, formally acknowledging Robert as his natural son, with all the rights of blood such an acknowledgement carried. The silence that fell over the hall was absolute. Sir Walter, his face growing paler by the second, felt the floor shift beneath his feet as he understood the monumental mistake he had just made. "This cannot be true," he murmured, searching in vain for some way to deny the evidence. "The son of a chandler, noble by acknowledgement of the Earl of Brackenfield himself." "The seal is genuine, Sir Walter," the bishop confirmed, after personally examining the document and comparing it against other known records of the Earl. "Robert is, by formally acknowledged right of blood, heir to more honor than your own family has amassed in 2 generations of prosperous trade." Sir Walter, understanding too late the scope of his own mistake, fell to his knees before the bishop, not out of devotion but out of the desperation of a man watching all his calculations of standing collapse in an instant. "Your Grace, I beg you, if there is any way to restore the betrothal between my daughter and young Robert." Robert, watching the same man who had publicly shamed him only days before now beg, felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and disdain, but also, to his own surprise, something like compassion for a man consumed by his own fears. "That, Sir Walter," he said at last, with a calm that surprised everyone present, "is no longer yours to decide. If you have ever been scorned for what others believed you were, without ever knowing who you truly were, then this story is, in part, your own as well." Edith found no justice by shouting at those who shamed her. She found it by sustaining, through 25 years of patient silence, a truth that finally came to light at the exact moment it was needed. May this story remind you that a person's worth never depends on their mother's trade nor on the appearances others judge at first glance, but on the firmness of character each of us builds through our own choices. And that truth, even when it takes 25 years to reveal itself, always finds the right moment to do so. In the days following the hearing before the bishop, Robert had to make the most important decision of his young life, whether to accept the title and lands his noble acknowledgement granted him, or to go on living the simple life of a craftsman he had known until then. "I do not know what to do, Mother," he confessed to Edith one night, in the same workshop where he had grown up. "Part of me wants to claim all that by blood is mine. Another part fears becoming someone I no longer recognize." "This decision, my son, has always been yours, not mine," Edith answered. "I only kept the door closed until you had the age and the wisdom to decide for yourself what to do upon opening it." Robert at last decided to accept the acknowledgement and the lands owed him, not out of ambition but out of a wish to honor the memory of a father he had never known, though he insisted on keeping his trade as a stonemason as a lasting reminder of the values his mother had instilled in him. As for Joan, whose loyalty to Robert never wavered even in the moment of greatest public humiliation, Robert decided, after much reflection, to renew the betrothal with her, not as a concession to Sir Walter's desperate pleading, but because the love between the two young people had proven genuine and resilient under the worst of trials. "I marry you because I love you, Joan, not because your father now begs now that he knows who I am," he told her, the day he proposed to renew the betrothal. "And I hope your father learns, in time, that true honor is never measured in family names or fortunes, but in how we treat those we believe beneath our notice." Sir Walter, humbled by his own mistake but genuinely repentant, spent the following years trying to repair, through deeds more than words, the harm done to Edith, secretly funding the expansion of the candle workshop she refused to abandon even after her son became a man of lands and title. Few in town ever knew what it cost the bishop to make the decision to summon that public hearing exposing both the truth about Robert and Sir Walter's shame. He was not, as some imagined, a man who took pleasure in humiliating a powerful merchant before the whole shire. That same night, before Edith and Robert returned to their workshop, the bishop asked to speak with them privately. "Lady Edith," he said, with a gravity that contrasted with the solemnity of that afternoon's hearing, "I want you to know I did not take this decision lightly. Publicly acknowledging a noble lineage hidden for 25 years could have raised complex legal disputes had the document carried even the slightest doubt of authenticity." "I understand, Your Grace," Edith answered. "And I thank you for acting with the rigor the situation deserved. "There is something else I must confess to you," the bishop continued, with an expression that for the first time all day seemed genuinely personal. "My own father was the natural son of a nobleman who never formally acknowledged him, and spent his whole life carrying the weight of an origin society never let him fully forget. Watching Robert receive the acknowledgement my father was always denied moved me more than I expected." Edith, moved by a confession she had not expected from a man of his standing, could only nod in silence, feeling that night, for the first time in many years, that her own story, however extraordinary it might seem, was not the only one marked by the silent weight of a hidden origin. Many years later, when Edith was an old woman with hands still stained by wax but with a peaceful back, one of her granddaughters asked her, as she had so many times before, to tell the story of the seal kept for 25 years. "Tell it again, grandmother, the part where you kept the secret so long without saying anything." "I have told it 20 times, my little one, and I will probably tell it 20 more," Edith always answered, with a smile that no longer hurt. "But very well, once more. Sit beside me, near the candle fire." And she told it, with the same precise details as always, how she had kept the wax seal in the priory chest, how Brother Oscar had kept the secret for a quarter century, how the truth had finally come to light before the whole assembled diocese. "And were you not afraid, grandmother, that Sir Walter would discover the truth before you decided to reveal it?" "I was afraid, yes, very afraid," Edith always answered, with the same disarming honesty. "But I learned that keeping a secret for the right reasons is not the same as hiding out of shame. I kept that seal for love of your grandfather, not for fear of the truth." 10 years after the hearing before the bishop, when Sir Walter had by then rebuilt, with genuine humility, a cordial relationship with Edith and her son, a passing merchant mentioned, without malice, over dinner at the Pemberton house, the story of a chandler whose son had turned out to be an acknowledged nobleman. "It is a curious story, is it not?" the merchant remarked, unaware he was speaking directly to the very man at the heart of that mistake. "Imagine scorning someone so, without knowing the whole truth." Sir Walter, by then a very different man from the one who had shamed Edith years before, answered with an honesty that surprised the merchant himself. "I need not imagine it, good sir. I myself made that very mistake, and have spent 10 years learning to live with the shame of having made it." Edith, receiving the message years later through a traveler who had walked the same road, listened in silence and, for a long moment, said nothing. Then, with the same serenity that had carried her through the whole affair, she answered, "Tell him, should you ever see him again, that I too learned something from all this, that justice does not seek to destroy those who err, but to restore to each what is rightfully theirs." The small wax seal Edith had kept for 25 years, and that Robert kept for the rest of his life as a reminder of his true origin, came at last to occupy a place of honor in the family chapel, not as a trophy of nobility, but as testimony to the patience and love with which his mother had protected it for a quarter century. A chronicler of the Shire, gathering decades later the region's most remarkable stories, included a detailed account of what had happened, citing words attributed to Brother Oscar himself shortly before his death, that justice does not always arrive with proclamations or armies, but sometimes with a small wax seal, kept with love for 25 years in the chest of a priory. Edith died at 78, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, her hands still gently stained by the wax she had worked her whole life. Her last words, as those present would later recount, were a simple instruction given to her eldest granddaughter. "Never judge anyone by their trade nor by their appearance, my child. For you never know what blood, what story, what silent sacrifice lies behind hands stained with honest labor." The wedding of Joan and Robert, celebrated at last some months after the hearing before the bishop, was a very different event from the failed attempt that had preceded it, modest in appearance, but heavy with a meaning the whole town understood without need of explanation. Edith, present this time in a place of honor, not as a scorned chandler but as the acknowledged mother of the groom, watched the ceremony with a mixture of pride and relief she found hard to contain even before her own neighbors. "I never imagined I would see this day, Brother Oscar," she confessed to the monk, present himself as a special guest. After so much silence, so much patience, to see him finally happy beside the woman he loves. "You made this possible, Edith," the monk answered. "Not only by keeping the secret so faithfully, but by raising a son capable of loving without condition, even after being so publicly shamed." Joan, radiant in her wedding gown, sought out Edith among the guests before the ceremony began, taking her hands with a genuine affection that surprised more than one onlooker. "Thank you for raising so good a man, Lady Edith," she said, with tears of happiness in her eyes. "I hope, in time, to earn the right to call you mother as well." Edith, moved to tears for the first time in a long while, could only embrace the young woman who would soon be her daughter-in-law, feeling that the whole town, witness to her own humiliation months before, was now witness also to the justice that had finally found its way. Brother Oscar, whose silent faithfulness had sustained Edith's secret for 25 years, spent the last years of his life devoted to a task he considered as important as any other monastic labor, carefully documenting every noble acknowledgement and every sensitive document that came to the priory archive, making certain no important truth would ever again have to wait a quarter-century before coming to light without need. He personally trained a young monk, Brother Aldwin, passing on to him not only the technical knowledge of cataloging documents, but also the most important lesson he had learned beside Edith. "An archivist keeps more than parchments, Aldwin," he often repeated. "He keeps the truths people are not yet ready to reveal, until the right moment comes. This duty requires patience, discretion, and the wisdom to know when to remain silent and when to speak." Brother Oscar died within the priory itself, surrounded by the documents that had been his companions for decades, several years after the hearing that had changed Robert's destiny. His last words, as Brother Aldwin, present in his final hours, would later recount, concerned Edith herself and the seal he had kept so faithfully. "Tell Edith that keeping her secret was the greatest honor of my monastic life. That no document is worth less merely because no one consults it for 25 years, Aldwin. Remember that always." Edith, upon hearing of his death, insisted on personally funding a small side chapel in the monk's memory within the priory itself, with an inscription she herself dictated, "Here is remembered a man who faithfully kept, for a quarter-century, a truth that restored to a son his true name." Years after the hearing before the bishop, when the story of the chandler's son acknowledged as noble already circulated, transformed and embellished, in distant shires, a woman of middle years arrived one afternoon at Edith's workshop, asking after the chandler of the kept seal, as they had come to call her in some neighboring regions. Her name was Ginevra, and she came from a distant shire where her own daughter faced a situation much like Robert's years before, a betrothal broken by a proud family that scorned the suitor's humble trade, without knowing the whole truth of his origin. "I have heard your story from 3 different minstrels, Lady Edith, each with different details," Ginevra said, seated across from her in the modest workshop. "But in every version, one thing repeats, that you kept your silence out of love, not shame, and that the truth, when it finally came to light, restored to your son far more than had been taken from him." "That is more or less how it happened," Edith answered, with a tired but sincere smile. Ginevra then told her own situation, and Edith listened with the same patience she had learned during the years when no one listened to her. "I cannot tell you what to do, Ginevra," she said at the end of the long conversation. "Every family must find its own truth and its own moment to reveal it. But I can tell you this, never keep a secret out of shame. Keep it only if it is out of love, and trust that the right moment will come for it to come to light." What few in town expected was that, as the years passed, Sir Walter's own grandchildren, raised hearing the full story of that error of judgment, became among the most fervent defenders of the idea that no humble trade should ever be cause for social scorn. "My grandfather told me this story differently than the minstrels tell it," the eldest grandson, by then a grown man, was fond of saying to young people who came to ask him about the shire's marriage customs. He did not tell it as a curious anecdote, but as the day he finally understood how little appearances weighed against a person's true character. It was that same grandson who, years later, insisted the Pemberton family fund the expansion of Edith's candle workshop, not as charity but as acknowledgement of the harm caused and the dignity with which she had faced it. Let this family never forget that true honor lies not in a name nor in a fortune, but in how we treat those we judge, without knowing them, unworthy of our respect, he always said, repeating almost word for word the lesson his own grandfather had taught him in his final years. As the years passed, with Robert now fully established as the acknowledged heir of his father's lands, the family decided to build a small chapel dedicated to Our Lady of Hope, in gratitude for the justice finally arrived after 25 years of silent, patient waiting. The idea came, in truth, from Joan herself, who wished to leave a lasting testimony of gratitude toward the woman who had raised, alone and with such sacrifice, the man she loved. It is not only out of devotion, Lady Edith, Joan explained, when she went to ask her blessing to build the chapel. It is because, 100 years from now, when no one remembers your name, whoever passes this way will know that justice was done here, and that a mother's love can sustain a secret for a quarter century without ever breaking. Edith, moved to tears, gave her blessing without hesitation, and helped personally choose the exact spot where the small building would rise, near the workshop where she had made candles her whole adult life. The chapel was completed 2 years later, with a small altar where, in time, a replica of the original wax seal was placed, forged in bronze by a local craftsman in honor of the story that had changed the destiny of both families. We bless today not only this chapel, but the memory of the justice God allowed to flourish in this family through the patience of a worthy mother, the parish priest said, at the dedication ceremony before the whole gathered community. The same bishop who had presided over the decisive hearing, by then retired from his duties after decades of service to the diocese, devoted his last years to writing a small treatise on cases of belated noble acknowledgement he had witnessed in his long career, including a whole chapter devoted, without naming her directly out of respect for her privacy, to the case of the Chandler who kept a seal for 25 years. I have presided over dozens of lineage disputes in my life, he wrote in that treatise, which would later circulate among bishops throughout the region for generations, but none taught me so much as that hearing. I learned that the most solid truth is not the one imposed by authority, but the one supported by documents no one can doubt, presented by those who had the patience to wait for the exact moment to reveal them. Brother Aldwin, Brother Oscar's successor as the priory's archivist, kept for the rest of his life the practice his master had taught him, carefully cataloging every sensitive document in the archive, without waiting for a dispute to arise before doing so. Despite all the changes the passing centuries brought, there was something about that town that never entirely changed. The story of the Chandler publicly shamed in church, whose son turned out to be an acknowledged nobleman by blood, continued to be told beside every winter fire. The town's children, generation after generation, grew up hearing that story without always knowing every exact detail, until some grandparent told them the full account, how a mother had kept a secret for 25 years, and how that patience had at last restored to her son far more than had been taken from him. And is it true they drove her from the church with the wedding linens in her arms? The youngest always asked, eyes wide before the fire. As true as the fact that same seal is still kept in the family chapel, whoever told the story always answered. And even more important, as true as the fact that, since then, no one in this town judges another merely by the trade of their hands. The original wax seal Edith had kept for 25 years came to be kept, along with the acknowledgement document, in a small wooden chest inside the chapel the family had built in her honor, transformed now not into an object of daily use, but into a family relic shown with reverence to each new generation. May I touch it, grandmother? Some child of the family always asked, with the same reverent respect one touches something sacred. Gently, my child, whoever held the chest's key always answered. This seal restored to your great-grandfather not only his inheritance, but his true name. It deserves to be treated with the same care your great-grandmother gave it her whole life. Travelers who, centuries later, stopped out of curiosity in the family's lands and asked why a simple wax seal deserved such care, always received the same brief answer, that this seal had restored to a scorned son his true lineage, and that it had slept 25 years in the chest of a priory before anyone had the wisdom to reveal it at the right moment. In the last months of her long life, when her strength barely sufficed to sit each morning beside the candle workshop, Edith received a visit from a young woman of the town, whose suitor was scorned by his own family for his humble trade. "I have heard, Lady Edith, that you know what it means to keep a secret of love for many years, and to see justice finally arrive," the young woman told her, sitting beside her. "My family scorns the man I love for his trade, and I do not know if they will ever find the strength to see his true worth." Edith looked at her a long while, and answered with words the young woman would remember for the rest of her life. "A person's worth, my child, never depends on the trade of their hands nor on appearances others judge at first glance. Keep faith in the one you love, and trust that the truth of his character will, sooner or later, make its way before those who refuse to see it." The young woman left with those words carved into her heart, and years later, when her own family finally acknowledged the genuine worth of the man she loved, she always remembered the conversation with the old chandler who had taught her to have patience without ever losing hope. Edith lived long enough to see her great-grandchildren grow up between the candle workshop and the chapel the family had built in her honor. In her last years, by then too old to work the wax with the skill of former days, she spent afternoons seated by the fire, watching the little ones play near the chest where the seal that had changed the whole family's destiny was kept. It was in one of those last years that, feeling her strength failing, she called Robert and Joan to give them one final instruction, as clear and firm as everything she had done in life. "When I am gone, I want the candle workshop never to close its doors, no matter how much land and title this family may come to possess," she said, her voice weakened but firm. "And I want the seal always to remain in that chapel, not as a trophy of nobility, but as a reminder that a person's true worth never depends on the trade of their hands." Robert, holding back tears, promised to honor every word, and did so for the rest of his life, passing the same instruction to his own children and grandchildren. Edith died at 78, as already told, surrounded by her family, her hands still gently stained by the wax she had worked her whole life. Her funeral gathered nobles and commoners in equal measure, all witnesses, in one way or another, to the story that had changed not only her son's destiny, but the whole town's understanding of a person's true worth. The region's chroniclers, gathering generations later the most remarkable stories, always agreed on the same closing line for the account of Edith's seal, that human dignity never depends on what the world chooses to see in a person, but on the silent firmness with which each of us sustains the truth of ourselves, even when that truth must wait 25 years to come to light. The first son of Robert and Joan, raised hearing the full story of his grandparents from earliest childhood, grew up with an understanding of honor very different from the one Sir Walter had once tried to instill in his own daughter. "My father never let me forget where our family came from," that son, by then a grown man, would tell anyone willing to listen. "Not only from the noble side, but also from the candle workshop where my grandmother labored 25 years in silence. Both sides of my blood taught me something different, and both are equally important." It was that same son who, years later, insisted the candle workshop continue operating under the family's direct oversight, employing young people of the town who, like his own grandmother, needed an honest trade to support themselves. "Let no one in this family ever forget that we were, and remain, sons of a chandler," he always said, repeating almost word for word what his grandmother had taught him in her last years. Centuries after Edith's death, when no one in town precisely remembered the faces of Sir Walter, Joan, or brother Oscar himself, the name Edith the Chandler continued to appear, year after year, in the ledgers of the candle workshop her descendants had kept running, invoked each time a new generation swore, before the chest holding the family seal, to go on honoring both the noble blood and the humble trade that had together given the family its origin. Historians of the Shire, studying the church archives generations later, would find in Edith's case one of the most cited examples of how patience, faith, and a mother's love could, together, restore to a son not only his fortune, but the whole of his lost identity. And each of them, finishing their account of the case, could not help but add the same closing reflection: almost as though Edith herself whispered the words to them across the centuries, that no public scorn, however deep it may seem in the moment, can ever erase the truth a person carries within, patiently waiting for the right moment to be revealed. And when, many years later, the family's descendants were asked why so great a shire kept with such care the story of one single Chandler who kept a secret for 25 years, the answer they always received was the same, passed word for word from those who had the privilege of knowing Edith in person, that some stories deserve to be kept not because the events they tell are extraordinary, but because they teach, better than any sermon, that the silent patience of one single mother, sustained to the end, can truly change the destiny of an entire family, and of every generation yet to come. There was, among all the moments of her long life, one particular afternoon Edith would remember more clearly than any other, even in her last years, when the memory of smaller details began to fade, the afternoon when, seated in the same workshop where she had made candles for decades, she watched her great-grandchildren play near the fire as the sun set over the town that had once publicly shamed her. "What are you thinking of, grandmother?" one of her great-granddaughters asked, sitting beside her on the wooden bench. "I am thinking how strange life's path can be, my child," Edith answered, with a peaceful smile. "Many years ago, on a very different afternoon from this one, they drove me from a church with my son's wedding linens in my arms, shamed before the whole town. And yet look at me now, I have more than I ever imagined having, not in gold nor in titles, but in the quiet certainty of having sustained my own dignity to the very end." It was on that same afternoon, as those present would later recount, that Edith spoke one of the last reflections her descendants would pass down most faithfully through the centuries, that life, like a wax seal kept with patience, sometimes demands we wait whole years before the truth can finally break free and come to light. Whoever today visits the small chapel raised in honor of Edith the Chandler, and asks with respect to see the chest where the seal is kept beside the acknowledgement document, will still find, carved in plain letters upon the threshold stone, the last line she asked to be written before she died, the very one that sums up, better than any chronicle, the whole meaning of her story, that a person's true worth never depends on the trade of their hands, but on the firmness with which they sustain the truth of who they are, even when the whole world chooses, for an instant, not to see it. Travelers who, centuries later, stopped out of curiosity on the family's lands and asked why so old a story continued to be told with such care, always received the same answer from whoever kept the chapel at the time, that a wax seal, kept 25 years in the chest of a priory, had restored to a scorned son his true name, and that no truth, however deeply hidden beneath layers of silence and caution, remains hidden forever. And so, every time a visitor asked why the candle workshop continued operating even after the family had gained enough land and title to abandon it altogether, the answer they received, spoken by whoever administered it at the time, always traced back to that same distant afternoon when a mother, without shedding a single tear, was driven from a church with her son's wedding linens in her arms and discovered, months later, that her patient's silence had been, from the very beginning, the seed of all the justice yet to come. Among the many people Robert helped throughout his life as an acknowledged nobleman, none brought him greater personal satisfaction than Matthew, a young orphaned apprentice stonemason who came to work in the very quarries where Robert himself had learned his trade before learning the truth of his father. "I do not know why a man like you troubles himself to teach me personally, my lord," Matthew had told him, surprised that the very heir of the Brackenfield lands would spend time instructing a common apprentice. "Because there was a time, Matthew, when I too was only an apprentice stonemason without knowing who I truly was," Robert had answered. "And because no young man of talent should have to make his own way alone, without anyone to teach him the trade with patience." Matthew, trained for years under Robert's personal guidance, became in time one of the most respected master stonemasons in the Shire, and passed on to his own apprentices the same lesson he had received, that the true nobleman is not the one born with a title, but the one who treats with dignity those who work with their own hands. Over the years, the stonemason school Robert founded in memory of his original trade became a respected institution throughout the region, training dozens of young people without resources who, like Robert himself in his youth, found in honest work a way to forge their own destiny, regardless of the name they were born with. Years after the hearing before the bishop, when the story of the chandler's son acknowledged as noble had already crossed the shire's borders, a woman from the coastal lands arrived one afternoon at the candle workshop, asking after Edith with an urgency that surprised those present. Her name was Beatrice, and she came seeking counsel about an ancient document her family had kept for generations, uncertain whether it held any real value or whether they should simply destroy it for fear of the complications it might bring. "I have heard that you know better than anyone how to keep a secret for years," and when at last to reveal it, Lady Edith Beatrice said, showing her a sealed parchment she had carried for weeks, never daring to open it. "My family has kept this for 3 generations, not knowing what to do with it." Edith, examining the seal with the same care she had given her own for 25 years, offered her the same counsel Brother Oscar had once given her. "Do not open it out of fear, Beatrice, nor destroy it for convenience. Take it to a trusted notary, or to a church archive where it may be examined with care. The truth it holds, whatever it may be, deserves to be known at the right time and in the right way." Brother Aldwin, Brother Oscar's successor as the priory's archivist, kept for decades the practice of receiving anyone from the shire who came seeking counsel about ancient documents, family secrets, or doubts about how to proceed before a truth kept too long. Every time someone arrives with a sealed parchment in hand, fearful of what it might contain, I think of Edith, he once confessed to a young monk he had begun to train, following the same tradition Brother Oscar had begun with him. And I think how much needless anguish is spared when someone has the wisdom to keep a secret for the right reasons, and the courage to reveal it at the right moment. That practice, quiet and constant, made the priory known throughout the region as a safe refuge for any family needing help to decipher, keep, or finally reveal a truth that had weighed on entire generations. Generations after Edith's death, the candle workshop she had founded continued operating in the very same place, run now by descendants who bore with pride both the noble name of Brackenfield and the humble trade of Chandler, never feeling the two identities to be in conflict. A traveler passing through the town centuries later, unaware of the full story, was astonished to discover that a family of acknowledged noble lineage kept with such pride a candle workshop that any other family of their standing would have considered beneath them. "Why do you continue in this trade, if you have lands and title in abundance?" he asked, genuinely curious, of that generation's workshop administrator. "Because this workshop is where it all began, good sir," the administrator answered, with a smile reflecting generations of quiet pride. "Our great-great-grandmother made candles here for 25 years, keeping in secret the truth of our noble blood, until the right moment came to reveal it. To close this workshop would be to forget where we truly come from." Years after fully assuming his role as heir to the Brackenfield lands, Robert commissioned a court painter to make a portrait never before made in the whole history of that noble house, a portrait of Edith, dressed plainly, holding a jug of wax and a seal, placed in a place of honor in the very hall where hung the portraits of generations of Brackenfield nobles. "Are you certain, my lord?" the painter asked, with some hesitation, receiving the commission. "It is not customary to hang the portrait of a chandler beside the portraits of earls and countesses." "That is precisely why I want it done, good man," Robert answered, with a firmness that admitted no argument. "For this family must remember, every time it enters this hall, that its true founder was no earl of ancient blood, but a woman who worked wax for 25 years to support her son without asking anything in return." Every new heir to the Brackenfield lands, upon formally taking up the title, was led by family tradition to stop before that portrait before any other ceremony, and to hear from the lips of some elder relative the full story of the chandler who had become, without ever seeking it, the true founder of the family's greatness. Edith's funeral gathered, as already told, nobles and commoners in equal measure, but it was a small detail, noticed only by the most attentive of those present, that remained fixed in the memory of that day. At the moment of burying her body, Robert insisted the wax seal not be placed in his mother's hands as a funeral relic, but returned to the chapel's chest, so that it may go on serving the living, not resting with the dead, as he told those present. Brother Aldwin, by then an elderly abbot of the priory, personally officiated part of the funeral rite, reminding all present of the words his own master, Brother Oscar, had spoken years before about Edith, that some people are born to receive justice, and others, rarer still, are born to teach an entire region what it truly means to deserve it. In the months following the funeral, Robert and Joan devoted themselves to completing Edith's last wish, making certain the candle workshop and its archive of family documents remained forever open to anyone in the Shire needing to consult well-documented examples of noble acknowledgement. Let this workshop never be only a place of memory, but also a place of practical help for those who need it. Robert wrote in the fund's official ledger, words his descendants would honor for generations. And so, century after century, the story of Edith the Chandler continued to travel well beyond the borders of the small town where it all began, carried not by armies nor by solemn proclamations, but by the simple stubbornness with which a family, then a priory, then an entire community, chose never to let the memory of a silent dignity fade with the passing of time. Whoever today stops to read the inscription upon the threshold of the small chapel, and then turns to look at the candle workshop still running in the same place so many centuries later, can still sense, if they pay close enough attention, the echo of that ancient lesson, that no humiliation, however public and cruel, truly has the power to erase what a person builds through patience, through faith, and through the firm, silent certainty of their own worth. Perhaps, the elders of the region always said, closing the tale beside the winter fire, this is exactly why so simple a story, a mother, a seal, a parchment kept 25 years, still deserve to be remembered across the centuries, because justice, when it finally finds its way to manifest, needs no great armies nor grand palaces to do so. It needs, often, only a single wax seal kept with love, one patient heart, and the time necessary for both to meet at the truest moment. And whoever, still today, walks as far as the candle workshop, stopping before the faint smoke still rising from its oven so many centuries later, will perhaps feel, if they pay proper attention, something of the same silent warmth with which Edith sustained, for 25 whole years, the truth the whole world would one day finally have to acknowledge and will understand, perhaps for the first time, that the same patience still lives today in every mother who keeps a secret out of love. Still waiting for the day when truth, at last, finds its way back to the light, no matter how many winters must pass before that long-awaited moment finally arrives, peaceful and deserved, exactly as Edith the Chandler always knew, deep in the silent quiet of her own heart, that it would. Some years after the hearing before the bishop, a traveling judge charged with settling inheritance disputes throughout the Shire arrived in town on a matter entirely unrelated to Edith's own, but, chancing to hear the Chandler's story mentioned over dinner among the local notables, asked to meet her in person before departing. I have presided over many cases of acknowledgement in my career, Lady Edith, he told her, seated in the modest workshop with the same curiosity of a student before a master. But rarely have I seen a case resolved with such clarity of documentation and so little bitterness from the one who was wronged. There was no room for bitterness, my lord, Edith answered, pouring him a cup of warm infusion as she would for any visitor. I had a son to protect, and then a document to keep safe. Bitterness would only have been one more burden to carry, with no benefit to show for it. The judge, struck by that answer, noted it in his own private papers, and in the years that followed, when presiding over similar cases in other shires, he was fond of telling Edith's story as an example of how dignity, sustained with patience, was worth more than any legal revenge. Before departing, the judge asked Edith one last thing, permission to cite her case, without naming her directly, in his own future judgments as a precedent of good conduct for anyone who might find themselves waiting years before a truth was finally acknowledged. You may, my lord, Edith answered, with the same simplicity as always. If my story can help even one other son be recognized for who he truly is, then all the silence I carried for 25 years will have been worth even more than I ever hoped. Months after Ginevra's visit, the traveler who had come from a distant shire seeking counsel for her own daughter's situation, Edith received a letter carried by a passing merchant, written by Ginevra herself in an uncertain hand but full of gratitude. Lady Edith, the letter read, read aloud by Brother Aldwin. Since Edith herself did not read with ease, I write to tell you that my daughter at last found the courage to present the proof of her suitor's true origin, and that his family, after much resistance, finally agreed to acknowledge his worth. Your counsel, to keep faith without shame and without haste, was what gave her the strength to wait for the right moment. Edith, listening to the letter with glistening eyes, asked Brother Aldwin to answer on her behalf, dictating simple words the monk transcribed with care. Tell her I am glad for her, and that she should always remember, patience is not weakness, it is the strongest form of faith a woman can carry in her heart. That letter, kept for generations in the family archive beside the original seal, became in time another testimony to the reach Edith's story had gained well beyond the borders of her own town, bringing comfort to families she would never meet in person. Brother Aldwin, by then keeper of that growing archive of letters, testimonies, and documents connected to Edith's story, began in time to organize them in a separate register, convinced that someday someone might benefit from studying them all together, as one long lesson on patience and faith. Joan, who outlived Edith by many years, devoted much of her old age to telling her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with details growing ever more vivid as the years passed, the memory of the mother-in-law who had welcomed her with genuine affection from the very first day, despite everything both families had endured together. Your great-grandmother Edith, she always told the little ones gathered around her, was not only a patient woman. She was a woman who knew how to forgive without forgetting, and who taught all of us that true nobility is not inherited, it is built, day after day, through our own choices. It was Joan herself who, in the last years of her life, insisted that one final inscription be added to the family chapel, beside the one Edith had already dictated so many years before, to make certain no future generation would ever forget the price paid and the reward finally won. Here rests the memory of a mother who kept 25 years of silence out of love, and who taught an entire family, noble by blood and by trade alike, that dignity needs not shout to make itself known. Even Sir Walter, before his own death, asked to be remembered in a small note in the margin of that same family register, with words his descendants would read for generations as a lesson in belated but sincere humility. Let no man of this family ever again make the mistake I made that day in church, judging a person's worth before knowing their heart. And it was with those words, carved into the stone of the small chapel beside the candle workshop that, according to what is still told in the region, has never stopped running, that the story of Edith the Chandler, her son Robert, and the wax seal kept for 25 years, found at last its final resting place in the memory of an entire town, passed from generation to generation as a living reminder that justice, however slow it may seem to arrive, never forgets those who await it with patience, with faith, and with the firm silent certainty of their own worth, no matter how long that may take, and no matter how many doubting hands must first touch the hardened wax of that seal before understanding, at last, that within it lay not only the inheritance of an earl, but the entire dignity of a mother who never once, in all those 25 long years, stopped believing that the truth, sooner or later, would find its way. Many decades after Edith's death, when Brother Aldwin himself was by then an elderly abbot respected throughout the region, a young monk named Brothers had asked to be personally trained by him in the art of cataloging archives, having heard since childhood the story of the seal kept for 25 years. "Why do you wish for this particular trade?" said Brother Aldwin asked, studying the young man with the same attention his own master, Brother Oscar, had once studied him. "Because my grandmother always told me, Father Abbot, that a faithful archivist can change the destiny of an entire family simply by carefully keeping a document for as long as it takes," the young man answered, with a sincerity that reminded Brother Aldwin of himself in his youth. "I wish to learn to be that kind of keeper." Brother Aldwin, moved by that answer, agreed to train him personally, passing on to him not only the cataloging techniques he himself had learned from Brother Oscar, but also the same fundamental lesson that had guided 3 generations of the Priory's archivists. "Remember always," said, "we do not merely keep parchments and seals. We keep the patience of those who wait, and the hope of those who believe that truth, sooner or later, always finds its way to the light." Brother said, trained with the same devotion that had marked his predecessors, kept alive for decades more the tradition of St. Wulfstan's archive as a safe refuge for the family truths that time, sooner or later, would have to reveal. It is still told, among the elders of the region who passed the story down beside the winter fire, that the very last candle made personally by Edith's own hands, mere weeks before her death, was never sold nor used for the workshop's daily lighting, but was instead kept by the family as a relic, placed beside the wax seal in the very same chest kept in the chapel. Why keep that particular candle, and no other? A curious visitor once asked the workshop's administrator, generations later. Because it was the last her hands made with full awareness, good man, the administrator answered, with the same silent pride that marked every descendant of the family. And because, our ancestors say, that candle was never lit precisely because its light was meant to remain whole forever, as a symbol of a whole life devoted to lighting, in one way or another, the path of those who stood beside her. And so, centuries after the last of the candles made by Edith the Chandler's own hands was laid to rest beside the seal that had forever changed her family's destiny, the story that began with a public humiliation in the middle of a church continued to be told, generation after generation, as living testimony that the silent patience of a single woman, sustained with faith for a full quarter century, could truly change not only the destiny of a son, but the very memory of an entire town, for all the centuries yet to come. As the generations passed, Robert's family established an unwritten but rigorously honored rule that every heir to the Brackenfield lands would follow upon taking up their inheritance. Before formally receiving title and property, every new heir had to spend at least one full year working side by side with the workshop's craftsmen, learning the trade with their own hands, just as Edith had practiced it for 25 whole years. It is not a punishment, my child, it is a gift, whoever passed on the tradition to the next young heir always explained. Only those who know the weight of hot wax upon their own hands can truly understand the value of the sacrifice that made possible everything we possess today. Many generations later, a local historian studying the traditions of the region's noble families was struck to find, among them all, this most unusual custom, and included it in his own treatise as a rare example of a house that, instead of forgetting its own humble origins, deliberately chose to celebrate them with every new generation. In most of the families I have studied, that historian wrote, time tends to smooth over and eventually erase the memory of modest origins. In the family descended from Edith the Chandler, the exact opposite occurs. The more time passes, the more actively that memory is cultivated, almost as though it, and not the noble title, were the true source of the house's pride. It was perhaps for this reason, the historian concluded in his treatise, that this particular family maintained for centuries a reputation for generosity and justice toward its subjects and workers rarely matched by other houses of the region, because none of its heirs ever forgot, not for a single day of their lives, where the blood running in their veins truly came from, and how much it had cost, in silence and patience, to earn the right to carry it with honor. And if, at the end of this whole long account, we were to draw a single lesson from the life of Edith the Chandler, perhaps it would be this, that the most lasting justice is never the kind imposed by force nor proclaimed through cries of outrage, but the kind built, day after day, through the silent patience of one who believes firmly in their own worth, even when the whole world seems determined to deny it. Edith never shouted against Sir Walter on the day of her own humiliation. She never begged, never wept publicly, never sought revenge when the truth at last came to light. She simply kept a wax seal for 25 whole years, with the same patient devotion she had brought to making thousands of candles in her own workshop, knowing that time, sooner or later, would render justice to those who truly deserved it. And it was precisely this patience, passed down through her descendants from generation to generation, that became the most precious inheritance Edith left her family, not the lands nor the title her son eventually received, but the silent certainty that no humiliation, however public and cruel, truly has the power to define who we are, if we hold firm, to the very end, to the truth of our own hearts. May this story, carried through the centuries by the elders of the region beside the winter fire, continue to remind whoever hears it that human dignity never depends on the appearances the world chooses to see in a person, but on the silent firmness with which each of us sustains the truth of who we are, even when that truth must wait a full quarter-century before finally finding its way back to the light. And may no one, ever again, in any town or in any age, dare judge a son's worth by the simple trait of his mother, without first knowing the silent firmness, the daily sacrifice, and the boundless love that those very hands, stained with honest labor, proved capable of sustaining for an entire quarter-century, asking nothing in return but the happiness and dignity of her only son, and the quiet certainty that the truth, one day, would finally and rightfully be known by all who patiently and faithfully cared enough to truly listen.